In March 2009, a factory quietly deleted its own name from a motorcycle it had spent 7 years and tens of millions of euros building. No press release explained why. 2 months later, that same nameless bike stood on a Grand Prix podium, and the company that built it never once mentioned it in its own marketing. This is the story of the engine nobody was allowed to claim. Act 1. Green. For 7 straight seasons, Kawasaki's MotoGP bike wore one color, an electric lime green you could spot from the far side of any circuit. It was a wild card entry in late 2002, a full-time embarrassment through most of 2003. By 2007, it had clawed its way to 3 separate second-place finishes. Never a win, but proof of life. In 2005, Kawasaki made a decision that would define everything that followed. They hired Ichiro Yoda, a Yamaha engineer with 2 decades inside a rival dynasty. His job? Build something that could actually compete. Act 2. The engine nobody talks about. Yoda's answer was radical. He wanted the engine screaming to 18,000 revolutions per minute, nearly 3 times what a road car ever sees. Ordinary metal valve springs can't survive that. So Kawasaki threw them out entirely and switched to a pneumatic system borrowed straight from Formula One. Gas cushions instead of steel coils, letting the engine rev without tearing itself apart. The result was one of the most exotic engines ever bolted into a motorcycle frame. In January 2008, Kawasaki even wheeled out an even wilder prototype at a test in Sepping, an all-new Screamer engine that stunned the paddock. And then they locked it in a cupboard and never raced it. That decision, made quietly and without explanation, is the whole story in miniature. Act 3. The crash. 8 months later, Lehman Brothers collapsed. The global economy went into free fall, and Kawasaki, a company whose motorcycle division is a small line item inside an empire that also builds ships, trains, and aircraft parts, was spending north of 60 million euros a year to chase a best finish of 5th place. Honda, whose founder built his legacy on racing, gritted its teeth and stayed in MotoGP out of something close to sentiment. Kawasaki had no such attachment. It was cold math, and it was about to wreck 2 careers. Act 4. The walkout. Marco Melandri signed with Kawasaki that summer, a former MotoGP championship runner-up chasing a fresh start, joining fan-favorite John Hopkins, who was still recovering from a horrific crash. The plan was a brand-new bike for 2009 and the strongest lineup the team had ever had. Then, on January 9, 2009, Kawasaki announced it was pulling out. Hopkins was left with no ride to recover for. Melandri, who had turned down other seats to be here, was suddenly a championship-caliber rider signed to a team that no longer technically existed, in the middle of a recession that had frozen every other seat on the grid. Act 5. The compromise. Here's where it gets strange. Manufacturers don't just walk away from MotoGP. They're bound by multi-year commitments, and Dorna, the sports promoter, wasn't about to let one of its factories vanish overnight. Under pressure from Dorna CEO, Carmelo Ezpeleta, Kawasaki didn't fully leave. They agreed to something smaller and stranger. Hand over a single race-ready bike to a stripped-down, hastily assembled outfit, service it, and refuse to develop it any further. No factory team. No Jon Hopkins. No sponsor logos. The new operation got a name on March 1st. Hayate Racing, Japanese for sudden violent wind. Fitting for a team that would arrive out of nowhere and vanish just as fast. Act 6. Funeral black. And then came the paint. The lime green that had defined this bike for 7 years disappeared entirely, replaced by flat, matte black. No Kawasaki branding anywhere on the fairing. Just mandatory technical decals on an anonymous machine that looked, in the words of more than one person in the paddock, like it belonged at a funeral. Nobody expected anything from it. Then, at round 4 in Le Mans, on a track switching between wet and dry, Melandri gambled early on slicks while faster men crashed around him. Even Valentino Rossi went down. He crossed the line in second place. It equaled the best result Kawasaki had ever managed in its entire MotoGP history, a result the fully funded factory team had needed 7 seasons and untold millions to reach once. This orphaned, sponsorless, frozen development bike matched it in a single afternoon. Melandri didn't thank Kawasaki afterward. He thanked Carmelo Ezpeleta, the man who had forced the company to stay. It didn't last. With no further development allowed, the black bike stood still while every rival kept improving. Melandri's best finish for the rest of the season dropped to 7th. He still ended the year 10th overall, outscoring the entire two-rider factory effort from the year before. Kawasaki never returned to MotoGP. But the money didn't disappear. It moved into World Superbike, where that same engineering culture built Tom Sykes a title in 2013, and then Jonathan Ray rode a green ZX. 10 are to 6 consecutive world championships. So here's what stays with me. What if Kawasaki had funded that black bike properly instead of freezing it? What if they'd raced the Screamer engine they buried in a cupboard in January 2008? What if Kawasaki wins its first ever MotoGP race, and the Superbike dynasty that followed simply never happens? Was killing the program the smartest financial call this company ever made, or the most heartbreaking? Tell me what you'd have done in the comments, because 15 years later, nobody's fully agreed on the answer.